in order to test whether this influence is indirect, we use multiple regression in basically test the influence of uncertainty avoidance on each of the determinants of consumer satisfaction. What we found is that the relationship basically is negative and statistically significant. So to calculate whether this influence is directly mediated, we calculated the overall indirect total effects versus the total effects, and we found that the indirect overall total effects is far higher than the direct total effects. So this basically supports the first idea, the first hypothesis. Second, we wanted to then test whether this influence is stronger for products and services. Again, we use multiple regression, and we found that in the case of uncertainty avoidance, basically the influence is stronger for products than for services. When we check the influence on the determinants of consumer satisfaction, we found similar results, that the influence of uncertainty avoidance on the determinants of consumer satisfaction is stronger for products than for services. So this supports the second hypothesis. What this is basically telling us in conclusion is that at the individual level, the influence of uncertainty avoidance on consumer satisfaction is indirect. This influence is mediated by the determinants of consumer satisfaction. Second, we found that this process is stronger for products than for services. At the managerial level, what does this mean? There is evidence that the Japanese consumer, due to their high uncertainty avoidance, is the strictest consumer in the world. So this may explain why some industries are quite advanced compared to others, like in the case of cell phones. This is named the Galapagos effect, how some industries are able to develop by themselves in isolated conditions. So what this research overall is trying to tell us is that the relationship between consumers and other industries depends on the type of country where you are operating. So managers should acknowledge the importance of culture and check what are the dimensions that operate in the country and how this relationship influences the relationship with the consumers. Now I would like to talk about the influence of emotions on consumer satisfaction. For doing this, we're talking about 3 chapters: the emotions and determinants of consumer satisfaction, which first I'm going to try to find evidence that emotions influence consumer satisfaction. Afterwards, I will try to integrate these findings of emotions into a comprehensive consumer satisfaction model. And finally, I will try to use the developed model into an area that has disregarded the use of emotions for a long time into the models, which is, in this case, personalization. So, for doing this, first I will the chapter, the analysis and the effect of happiness on consumer satisfaction. What they basically do is to see this recursive relationship between consumer satisfaction and happiness. But I concentrate only in the influence of happiness on consumer satisfaction and not the relationship. Why do I do that? Because the influence of consumer satisfaction on happiness has been already researched, demonstrated by many researchers. So I concentrate in some area that is quite already known, in this case, the influence of happiness on consumer satisfaction. Why do I think that happiness influences consumer satisfaction? First of all, I think this happens because there's a lot of psychological evidence that show that, for example, consumers have a positive bias in memory selection. When they are in a good mood, they tend to remember only positive things. So their state of mood activates only positive memories, and this will influence their evaluations. Second of all, there's a positive bias in the evaluation of experiences. There's research that has found that when consumers are in a good mood, they tend to evaluate quality more positive than it really is. Third, happiness also activates optimism. What makes optimism in the consumer? Makes them use less strict modes of evaluation. They are not that strict. Therefore, you may also expect more positive evaluations. So, it's hypothesized that happiness influences consumer satisfaction. To test this relationship, I use second stage least square modeling. Why did I not use regular linear modeling? Because, as I said, this is a recursive relationship. So both errors are correlated. So according to Waldrich, the best way to overcome this idea is to use second stage least square modeling. I could have also used maximum likelihood estimation, but the problem with maximum likelihood estimation is that you have to specify all the determinants of each variable. In this case, we have limited information. So the method of second stage least square modeling is more robust and allows us to overcome these limitations. What we found is that as we expected that happiness influences consumer satisfaction. So emotions actually make consumers be more positive when they're evaluating products. Similarly, testing other research already made by other researchers, we found we support their ideas that consumer satisfaction actually influences happiness. What does this mean at the managerial level? It means basically that emotions should not be disregarded from consumer satisfaction models, as the rational agent model has been doing for the last 3 decades. So, what they can do, what managers can do, for example, is correct the effect of emotions when marking consumer satisfaction. There is, for example, we know during the financial crisis, Gallup research has found that the mood of consumers had been going down, their happiness was really low. So what the companies could have been measuring were consumer satisfaction, which could have been a biased result, because they were not actually measuring objective consumer satisfaction. So they could have correct this kind of personalization in consumers using models that use emotions. So companies should create consumer satisfaction models that use emotional processes. Now I would like to use this evidence where I prove that emotions influences consumer satisfaction, and I wrote a chapter which is named Emotional versus Rational Processes in the Chain from Perceived Quality to Consumer Need. What I do different from previous research is that I characterize processes as rational and emotional processes. And I introduce a new step, which is product beliefs, and I will be explaining you now how I do that. First of all, I would like to define what is, I think there are 2 types of consumer satisfaction. One is affective consumer satisfaction, which is the emotional overall evaluation of product performance, and cognitive consumer satisfaction, which is the response to the perceived discrepancy between prior expectations and actual product performance. So what I basically did is to develop this model where I characterize emotional and rational processes. And I introduce a new step. The classical research of consumer satisfaction only considers that perceived quality influences consumer satisfaction and the behavioral intentions or loyalty. However, I introduce a new step, which is, I call it product beliefs. Why did I do that? Because if you think about it, when you're evaluating a product or a service, you do not think overall in all the characteristics or features that you had about the product. You do not remember everything. You have some kind of help in your memory. You know, okay, this product is more or less good, more or less bad. So you have your help in your memory. These kind of beliefs about the product that you could have get from the media, from some friend will have told you. So you have what is called product beliefs. And that mediate this influence of product experience on product evaluations. Supporting this idea that I have, there is some famous model developed by Eason and Axon that has proven that experience in consumers create beliefs, and these beliefs allow them to make evaluative judgments which later influence their behavioral intentions. Additionally, what I wanted to see is also these crossover effects, how emotional and rational processes interact. There's a lot of evidence from neurobiology and also from other areas like behavioral economics that rational and emotional processes are constantly interacting. And originally I want to see whether this interaction exists. So for doing this, I developed a questionnaire which I use, in this case, latent variables. I use different types of measurements. I did the questionnaire in Bolivia and Japan. I tested mobile phones and fast food restaurants. Most of the respondents were from Bolivia and they were male. And I used multi-level structural equation modeling to test this model. Why did I use multi-level structural equation modeling? Because initially I wanted to see, like in the other case, whether the brand characteristics of each country could influence or bias the results. As I found in the results, there is not such a thing. The brand market share does not influence these results. And